Good morning, everybody. I'm Ron Brownstein. I'm editorial director of Atlantic Media, publishers of the Atlantic and National Journal, and also a political analyst for CNN. And in addition, excuse me, in addition to the speakers you've already heard, we're joined on the stage this morning by Larry Goodman, who's the chief executive officer at Rush University Medical Center, right nearby. When I was here last year writing about some of the reform efforts that you have underway, I spent a lot of time writing about the debate about inequality, even more time writing about the demographic change the country is going through and how our institutions are or are not adapting to that. And when I was here, I felt as though I was watching those national debates at the level of hand-to-hand combat, really, of trying to change institutions, but also trying to change individual lives with all the kind of messy, sprawl of taking a single person from a track they were on and putting them on a track where they would have a better chance of success for themselves and their families and their kids. So I want to start by talking a little bit about how you set your overall direction. When the chancellor and the mayor, when each of you arrived, you inherited a system that had many assets, but also had a series of overlapping, interlocking problems. Campuses that didn't really have a central cohesive structure, degrees that didn't have a lot of credibility in the workplace, and above all, a completion rate that had fallen to 7%. And I'm interested, as you looked at all of those distinct challenges, how do you settle on the Colleges to Careers initiative as a way of kind of responding? What were the problems that you were trying to solve? And of all the different stresses that you faced, why did you move in that direction? Chancellor?
So, as you stated, there was many issues that the institution was faced with. But I think none more important than ensuring that our students had a relevant degree when they left here. We had students already in the pipeline, students already in the system, and so we needed to address the programs, the relevance, the structure, the support, and operations first. Relevance being the first thing. Every day we have students leaving our institution. So what was most critical is how do you figure out what our industry will demand, and how do you ensure that your institution are offering those in-demand credentials, whether it be a credential that leads right to the workplace or whether it be a credential that transfers to a four-year institution. But the most critical thing is ensuring that when students came here, they were not wasting their time and their money. We had to get the programs right before we addressed anything else. Although, as you know, we addressed a lot of that at the same time with relevance leading our focus.
Mr. May.
There's a story behind all of them at the same time, but we'll just leave. That's another panel, okay? I want to echo what Cheryl said and do it from this perspective. We have the chancellor from Richard J. Daley, but there's an example. This was true 2 years ago. I don't know if it's true today, but the point is still true, okay? That's the school for advanced manufacturing. If you drew a 10-mile circle around that school, 10 miles, from Richard J. Daley, which is advanced manufacturing, there's 14,000 help wanted signs in manufacturing. So you have people looking for work, and you have employers looking for people who are looking for work, and yet they can't find each other. So I'm trying, the whole goal when Cheryl says make it relevant, we're trying to make the community college that beacon of light where two people literally can meet. One person looking for a job and a career, and a person looking for an aging workforce that they know they don't have enough young employees coming up through the system. Nobody before, insurance industry would look to Harold Washington, the school of it wasn't a school of professional services. So we had to say to the people hiring, what are you looking for? And what can we do at this stage of kind of skill and educational development that would make it relevant when you do hire them, you can take them to the next level. And then for the students' part is, look, our goal is that nobody graduates here with debt, but people do. And so the question is, how do we make the education system relevant so you get a seat at the HR office rather than we'll call you back if we have something. And That is why the whole effort was, and it fit into this study we did with Brookings and McKinsey. No sector drives more than 13% of our employment. Most diversified, Chicago is the most diversified economy in the United States of America. Now, if you want a Booth School graduate in business school, we have that. If you want Kellogg School, we have that. You want computer science and engineering, University of Illinois, one of the best, we have that. But if I can tell every employer and every employee that you can scale from Harold Washington all the way up to Booth School or Kellogg School and everything between, Chicago and Chicagoans will win. And that was the point.
Let me follow up on one question before bringing you guys in. When you looked at these challenges, did they seem to use separate problems? I mean, how do they fit together in your mind? If you're trying, you said your primary focus was increasing relevance, but you also face this completion crisis. How were the two distinct issues, or did they reinforce each other?
They all reinforce each other. First of all, relevance gives students the motivation and hope that their education will pay off. I quite often hear people still say in the academic world that education is about self-discovery. I don't subscribe to that. Not one student has told me they're here to discover themselves. They've pretty much discovered that before they've gotten here. What they're trying to discover is a pathway that will increase their economic value. But even with relevant credentials, if your institution is not structured in a way in which they can complete in a timely manner and still juggle work, family, and other responsibilities, it takes them too long to get through. That's why we have a big effort around pathways, and 100% of our credit students now have an educational plan on a relevant pathway. But then there's supports. They need to be supported along the way. When I became chancellor, the student to advisor ratio was 900 to 1. There is no way a student can get the support they need with that. It's now 300 to 1, but we've also did things like open up wellness centers because they have social and emotional needs. That supports. But then there's operations. How do you pay for this? Obviously, we can't depend on state funding to pay for what we need.
Don't look at me about state funding.
Right. So obviously, we can't.
Yeah, just keep going down south that way. Springfield.
Exactly.
So don't stop at Peoria. Just keep going. You'll hit it.
Just keep going that way.
Yeah.
So I have a philosophy that before you approach anyone else for funding, you have to clean your own house. And you have to make sure you're efficient. You have to make sure that you are being resourceful. A lot of times we think we need more resources when all we need to do is be more resourceful. And so we spent a lot of time with a big focus on operations where we've saved quite a bit and been able to invest. So they all work together. Yeah.
Cheryl's savings in the central office was the down payment to fund this. It was all done internal through basically cost cutting in the central office was the seed money from Malcolm X. And I would say, I didn't mean to cut you off, Cheryl, is if you make it relevant, students will complete. If they think it's irrelevant to the ability to get a job, they're going to drop out because it's too much pressure. And one thing I didn't get a chance to say, and I want to make this one point. So we're all talking about the community colleges, et cetera. When I first got elected, in our high schools, we have dual credit and dual enrollment in high school for our community colleges. There were collectively 300 slots out of 110,000 kids. Last year, we finished, and we're up at, when you do dual credit and dual enrollment together, around 5,000. So if you get kids in junior, senior year starting to think and then taking that class, one, they save money. Two, they're finished high school because it's more relevant to where they're going. And you do not see high schools and community colleges as two institutions passing like two ships in the dark, but you begin to integrate them in a more relevant sense. You have a chance that kids will see high school not as the destination, but as a milestone on their way to the next step.
So Melody Barnes, you've seen this from both the public sector at the highest level and at the private sector. When you think about kind of community college reform and the broader question of bridging the skills gaps in a community, how does that fit into kind of the larger agenda that a place must undertake to have both growth and inclusive growth?
Right. It's critical. I mean, jobs are the lifeblood of any community. It sets your tax base. It determines whether or not a person can buy a home or rent an apartment or rent a home. The transaction, the buying and selling of goods, all of those require that people have family wage sustaining jobs, not just any job, a family wage sustaining job. And we also know that, and it used to seem like far away when we talk about 2020. Remember when that seemed like forever ago? Well, it's almost here. And we know by the year 2020, 65% of our jobs will require that people have some kind of credential after high school. As Ram said, high school is a marker along a path. It is not the end of the path. And we also know that community colleges that have the vision that the chancellor has been talking about, those that are aligned and in deep partnership with employers, are able to ensure that people have the skills so that they can get the jobs, so that they can actively participate in their communities. And we also know that when we do that, we start to turn other kinds of vectors around. It means that we are spending, there's less of the public purse that's going to juvenile justice related issues, that's going to healthcare related issues, other public services and safety net services that absolutely have to be there. But we want to make sure that people who can get escape velocity through the education system can get it and can be active members of the community. And we also know that when we do that, we create communities that are thriving and vibrant and dynamic, and that starts to attract other people and other businesses. I was just at a foundation board meeting for a foundation that I'm on that focuses on, as my husband always reminds me, not poverty, anti-poverty. And we were out west in a city that is dramatically losing its employer base. And I knew when I saw that when I started looking around at the data and statistics, what I saw was the level of education was doing this. Mm-hmm. And employers were pulling out and pulling back because they can't find the trained workforce that they need. In reverse, when people see the kind of activity that's happening in Chicago taking place here, employers start to come in because they recognize that that pipeline can be filled. So these are critical issues that we can work across all sectors to ensure that we are building the talent pipeline that we so desperately need.
I would amend only one thing that you said when you noted that 2020 isn't that far away, noting that that is the next presidential race. I don't think anybody is ready for that to be
go there.
For another one coming. Let's see if we can survive this one first.
Is that your suggestion of saying duck?
Yes.
Tuck and roll.
Mr. Good, let me mention part. Obviously, a cornerstone of the reform efforts here have been focusing each campus on one industry cluster and then recruiting industry partners to work through every step of that process. As the CEO of a big institution, you have a lot of demands, internal and external demands on your time. What was it in that made it worth it for your time to enhance this partnership with the community college system? Why did you feel it was worth a worthy investment of your time and the institution's time to become a partner here at Malcolm X?
So that's an easy one. So first of all, Rush is, as the mayor said, is an academic medical center, primary care all the way through transplants. We're also a university, and we're a health science university. So we train medical students, nursing students, College of Health Sciences, and a graduate school, only health science training. That's all we do. There's no marching band, there's no English department, there's no football team. All we do is health science training.
You take care of the football players.
That's right, that we do. So what we try to do is integrate all these pieces of education, health science-related research, and clinical care, and then we look at our community. So we look at our community, as we've talked about. This is a community with significant disparity of healthcare outcomes. We have a lot of healthcare programs in the community, we have a lot of educational programs in the community, but taken collectively, although individually, we have metrics of success. The frank outcome is you don't see huge community improvements. And actually, there's a link that disparities in educational opportunities lead to disparities in healthcare outcomes. So we have a very big interest in trying to address the healthcare needs of our community. So that's one piece, and a logic that we would be a partner both by proximity and the people we train would be a second reason. But neither together are sufficient to have tipped this over. What did it was really what's sitting over here. So it's the leadership of the mayor and in particular the chancellor. So I got to know the chancellor and her leadership team. And as you've heard, there was a commitment to address the issues head on. It's hard to get a group of faculty members from two sides of the street to work together on curricular change. It's hard to break stereotypes that exist about one about the other just across the highway. We didn't know each other very well. These partnerships are not easy, and they depend on dependable leadership. And there's no question that Cheryl Hyman is that dependable leader. So as we looked at this, we thought this was a great opportunity to link up with a training program. Sorry. So, and the mayor. So we thought, no question about it.
That right there.
But we thought this was a great opportunity to link up with a training program that was training complementary trainees. So these are in degree-granting programs that were complementary to the ones we did. And we, in fact, created some new degrees, a Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences, where students could take 2 years at Malcolm X, 2 years at Rush. Some of those students have graduated, have entered our nursing program. Other students have graduated from our combined programs or from Malcolm X and entered our workforce. And there's one last piece. If you look at another reason why we're interested in this, we talked about the diversity of the economic background of this city, the diversity in general of this city, but healthcare diversity as far as who's in healthcare as the healthcare workers is not as diverse as it needs to be. And that's true in Chicago, and it's true nationwide. So how do you correct that? And our patients want that. Our communities expect that. We have a lot of programs to do this. This, to me, is among the most promising.
Well, let me follow up, because you alluded to, that it's not an easy partnership to actually work together, to collaborate on curriculum. It's easy to talk about in principle, employers and educators working together to shape a relevant curriculum. Talk a little bit about what are the challenges, what does it take to actually make that work?
So from our standpoint, first, these are always investments of time initially, and almost always more than money. These are, and there's got to be a suspension of disbelief. You have to believe this thing is going to work. And that, again, takes the commitment of leadership to be part of it. So the Chancellor's leadership team was always at meetings, and we would have regular meetings of the leadership of the two organizations tracking the programs we were trying to develop. Clearly, most of the work is done on the City College side. There's no question about it. But our involvement, as far as our understanding of the programs that were being developed, are looking for linkages and are attracting other partners. So BMO Harris Bank made a significant contribution to allow us to actually add on some people that would track and look at the research of what we're trying to do, provide some scholarship dollars. A variety of things like that help. And once you get people on both sides of the street committed, there's one other piece to this, is people need mentoring throughout this. And yes, it's true, people need training beyond K through 12. They also need mentoring beyond K through 12. And it's impossible to have an effective healthcare training program unless you're linked to a committed clinical program, because a lot of this is apprenticeships. So what is important is to develop those apprentice models and mentoring models that are effective, and people aren't worried about giving honest feedback one to the other. Where are we missing the boat? What can we do better? Where can the training improve? Because these are works in progress.
So from the other side, Chancellor, from the point of view of the academic institution, what are the biggest challenges to, in fact, working with employers on?
I think the biggest challenge is trust. It's not, public-private partnerships is not as common or not as accepted as we all in this room think they should be. Particularly when it comes to curriculum and academics, that's a very protected, kept close to the heart subject in this industry, so to speak. And so there has to be trust, rightfully so. Faculty has to trust that, hey, we know how to deliver, we know best how to deliver, we work the closest with the students. They have to trust that their voices are heard in that, and that it's not just some outside entity coming in dictating, and there's a common goal. And so when the faculty and staff from Rush come over, they work together with the faculty, and it's a, here's what we need versus here's how we deliver it. And how do we take those two together and make it work? And I think having myself and Dr. Goodman's involvement, personal involvement, having the involvement of the presidents, having the involvement of the staff, but also faculty actually seeing their input being taken into consideration into the real world, it builds a level of trust. And I think that's so vital, because this is new. this model and the things that the mayor and I are doing are not common. It's very new, it's very needed. And so how do you build that trust, and even trust on the employer's end as well?
Mel, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I completely agree with what the chancellor is saying, and one other thing I would also add to that is data.
Yep.
And information, and that has been hard to come by. It's
Exactly.
been a national problem. It's something we used to talk about a lot in the White House. How do you get real-time data? And one of the things that we were doing, I mentioned in my introduction, JP Morgan and others are focusing on this too, is the skills gap report that we did for Chicago about a year ago, last June, and we focused on the fact healthcare and transportation logistics are critical industries in Chicago. So we know where the jobs are going, because as the president used to say to us, when people finish a program, there should be a job on the other end of it. You shouldn't have trained for something that's long gone. So we know that those are sectors that are rising. And then looking under the hood of that, so you just don't say healthcare and transportation logistics, but what jobs inside those sectors are relevant and what kind of training is necessary so that employers and faculty and community college presidents and chancellors can get together and say, this is how we align our curriculum with what's actually coming online, and that we're not speaking past each other and just at the level of platitudes of, we want to work together, like it's some daisies and puppies and apple pie kind of mission, but how do we really get to the nitty-gritty of what's necessary? So that data and keeping that going over the long haul, it's also not a one-shot deal. Those things are critical as well.
I got a follow-up for the chancellor on that, but first let me ask you, Mr. Mayor. So when you're talking to employers, you know, I mean, I'm assuming you're part of the point of sale for engaging large employers to
Sale
work.
is not exactly how Larry would have described the experience.
Yeah. What is the argument? Like, what is the argument that convinces an employer it is in their interest to partner?
I would, first of all, let me say this. They're coming at us. They know the demographic, skill deficit, and you have employers that are recruiting people out of retirement to come back in. So you're pushing an open door. The employers know the problem they have today that is exponentially getting worse down the road. I think we have to, now normally they will go chase at your four-year institutions. We have to be relevant of one kind of undercurrent. Obviously after the GI Bill, a lot of community colleges like our four-year institutions were relevant, but when we got to the Sputnik area where everything got shoved to research universities and research entities and four-year institutions, community colleges and their relevancy and their kind of significance atrophied. What we're trying to do is realize that right here is a tremendous educational benefit that had gotten forgotten and atrophied as a weight. Now, just take this as an example. The Illinois Medical District for Chicago, it's 2 blocks over here. It didn't take a genius to realize, hey, Malcolm X should be into the healthcare area because right down there is like 10,000 jobs. I mean, I didn't need to go get a study for that. But let's be honest, the hospitals, we're going to the Philippines to find nurses. Fact. And yet, 2 blocks away is a community college that we said, okay, let's get into the healthcare area. There's a lot of jobs there. And that's what we did. And it did, I mean, seriously on this, Larry and his team, Stroger, Children's Hospital, they know they're going around the globe looking for skills and talent, and yet we have an educational institution that literally 2 blocks away, not on a different time zone, could be relevant to your bottom line and your needs. So this was an open door. You didn't have to kind of sell them. They know that this is true of the trades, this is true of manufacturing, this is true of healthcare, it's true of professional services, true of transportation, distribution, logistics, trucking, CDLs. They're calling people out of retirement to fill jobs today. So that's, you know, so to me, that's what we were trying to do. And give you an example. I named to you, and then I'll shut up because it's more important to hear from other people. But I've been like waiting for 5 years to have this conversation. Cheryl and I have been talking in a telephone booth to each other. But, I mean, this is not to take away from hospitals. We all know that there's a massive revolution going on in healthcare. It's going from the hospital to home health care. How do we make what's happening here relevant to where the jobs are tomorrow, not today? And if you have an institution that's focused on a career and an industry specifically, you can prepare people today and prepare them for tomorrow. And that's where the trick is. And I will just tell you, the employers, you could, you're pushing an open door.
Melody Barnes, Melody noted the, this question of maintaining relevance, though. I mean, the Wayne Gretzky notion of skating to where the puck is going to be. How often are you finding that and how difficult is it to constantly revise the curriculum to remain relevant? How often do you find yourself having to kind of go back with a Rush or Aon or some of your other employer partners and kind of say, we got to change what we're doing?
Well, that's a really important point, but I'll say this. How often it changes depends on the industry. How you keep up with that change depends on the model and the structure that you have within your institution. So the model for change can't be the flavor of the month, or the model for change can't be let's just increase our completion number. The model for change has to be what is the new structure we need within our institution in order to keep up with a very global global changing industries, but what is the model, the new way we need to think about delivering higher education to achieve the goal that everyone who comes in our institution ends up economically better. And so the model that we've established here is one that's ongoing. So it's not, as the mayor would always tell me when we first launched College to Careers, we're not trying to become, the short order cooks. So it's not about Rush has 10 jobs, hey, let's get someone in those 10 jobs. It's not that. Many of our students may not go work at Rush, but Rush as the lead partner is helping us develop a curriculum that is reflective of the industry. So they can go work at Rush or any other hospital that the mayor named, but it's an ongoing process. So each one of these schools has an advisory board made up of the industry partners within the industry that they represent, and it's ongoing advisory committee. So we're constantly watching the market. We have a very, very robust in-house data team who is constantly working with national experts to keep up with data, not only locally, but nationally too, on where the market is going. So it is a process and a model. It's not just an initiative.
We've talked a lot about building ties with employers. I want to talk now about kind of reaching out to students. I mean, many of the students who might benefit the most from what you're doing are in communities that are disconnected in many ways from the opportunities that the city has to offer, that are alienated in some instances from what's happening. I mean, you have a lot of controversies you've had here in the last year, issues of trust and so forth. Let me ask you, how do you make people aware? And as you go back, an institution that, as you say, whose reputation was tarnished in the marketplace, not only with employers, but I think with students. What are the challenges, given all of that, in making a 17-year-old, or for that matter, a 27-year-old, aware that there is something new here that they could benefit from? I mean, what goes into that? I mean, maybe, Mr. Merriam, you want to start? I mean, what is it? What does it take?
Well, first of all, one, that they can see the relevance. It gets back to that, to a job and a career. Second is that's why we dramatically expanded dual credit, dual enrollment, because if kids are having experiences already at the colleges, they know it. It's not something they fear if they're coming from a home where college or higher education is not part of the family conversation or narrative. So being in high school immediately also gives them an exposure, also gives them the confidence that this is not something they have to fear because they can handle it and they get their hands around it. And so I think those are the building blocks. And then the last thing about the Chicago Star Scholarship, we started that first year, we now have about 950 to 1,000 kids in. I think the last application process was like north of 4,000 already. Doesn't mean that all are going to get in because they got to meet certain criteria to be average, et cetera. But that is spreading like wildfire in our high schools. So I would say to you, there's a couple things, it's not one thing. Getting kids in high school to know that they can handle college, exposed to that class work, is an essential, important building block.
Are applications rising?
Applications are rising very quickly with STAR. and it is spreading like wildfire. When you present students with the opportunity, particularly an affordable opportunity, they want the opportunity. But to get to your initial question, we service already more than 100,000 students that fit the very criteria in which you described. Students are very much motivated, and our communities are very much motivated by what they see and what they know. Prior to College to Careers, prior to reinvention, they didn't see students doing well coming from city colleges of Chicago. They didn't hear good stories coming from city colleges of Chicago. I was one of the rare part of that 7%. But now they see that students graduating from city colleges are getting good jobs. They see employers like Rush, who's working with city colleges of Chicago. These are all the same, they're neighbors, they're friends. Many people asked when Kennedy King won the Aspen Award, well, what was the secret sauce? You know, and we have a secret sauce. I'm not gonna tell you what it is, but we have it. But many people, and I had to step back and say to people, you know, let's just think about how students get motivated. Let's not erase the fact that many students were motivated to stay at Kennedy King and complete because they saw how their friends and neighbors benefited from that. That's a huge driver and motivator.
Can I ask you, I want to ask you, we don't have much time, too much time left for this, but I want to ask you about the bigger context of this, and having, you know, looked at this from the apex of the White House, position in the White House. The backdrop of this is the demographic transformation that you alluded to in your opening remarks. We are now at a point for the first time in American history where a majority of our public school K-12 students nationwide, not just Chicago and LA and Dallas, but nationwide, a majority of our public school students are kids of color. The estimates are that all of the net growth in the workforce over the next 20 years will be, you know, workers from minority groups and who are on the wrong side today of most of the educational attainment gaps. When you look at the scale of what that means for the workforce and the economy, how do you assess our overall response as a country to that? Are we sufficiently aware of what this means to be living through this transformation, and are we making the focus and the investments to deal with it?
Sure. I think there are a committed group of people, like people sitting in this room today, that get it. I think much of the country doesn't understand the degree to which our wagons are hitched to those stars. And unless and until we start to ensure an excellent education, a baseline excellent education for students, all students, including students of color, who are in some of the least high-performing schools in the country, then we aren't going to get there, one. Two, understanding that the engine of growth for communities and for the entire country requires that young people of color get that kind of education and that they are prepared for the workforce. Every safety net program, Social Security, all of that requires that these young people are working in well-paying jobs in order that we support our country and those programs, and that we are vibrant and dynamic and competitive. And beyond that, that level of diversity is going to be our greatest asset. I think too many people, and I know I'm preaching to the choir in this room, too many people think, oh, these are young people that'll never amount to anything, never going to be anything. My experience is quite the opposite, that given the kind of programs, given the kind of modeling, the kind of structure that we're talking about here, and it's across the board, and it's nonprofits, it's the education sector, it's the private sector working together, given that they not only can achieve, but can excel. And I've seen it in community after community. And I think this also goes to your last question. Part of it is about meeting people where they live. So you look at programs like the one with Lurie Children's Hospital here. You look at Instituto del Progreso. You look at Women Employed. These are respected organizations that are working with the Chicago public school systems. They're working with Rush. They're working with other employers. They're focused on how to work with people who have maybe been participating in underperforming curricular environments to make sure that they are performing, and that they're directly connected to apprenticeships and internships that are practical, that keep young people engaged and involved so that they can succeed. Our country has to get this at a systems level. It isn't program by program. It is the correction of systems to ensure that not only we address the moral problem of making sure that people get opportunities, that we're addressing the competitive necessity of people getting those opportunities.
Mr. Goodman, I mean, we know that in Chicago, 3/4 of the under 18 population is African American or Hispanic. Soon in the country overall, a majority of the under 18 population will be kids of color. When you look at this this is the flow of your future workers, future home buyers, future taxpayers, future people paying payroll tax to support Social Security for the aging white baby boom. When you look at this future flow, do you feel that they are on a track to be able to fill the jobs that you're going to have?
You know, I think there's work to do. I think this is the beginning, and this is a major step. But as I look at this, and you look at even the 7 or 8 zip codes right around us, and you look at the hardship index in those zip codes, this is a multifactorial problem. What I'm optimistic about is this city is interested in partnerships, and there's some very effective ones. So what links in an opportunity like Malcolm X is when those of us who are in high school programs and we're doing mentoring can make sure people know at that level to remind people about the B average, about Malcolm X, and we provide them with summer programs. When we are in healthcare, we're partnering now with Federally Qualified Health Centers. I really do think this is an opportunity to get people together on the healthcare side as well as the education side, as well as the jobs, because I don't think these things get solved as a piece of the pie at a time. No matter how effective it is, even education done well may not be sufficient unless these other things are addressed.
So final closing words for the mayor and the chancellor. As the job of closing these educational attainment gaps that you are, as I said, in the hand-to-hand combat with here in Chicago will be increasingly relevant for cities and communities all over the country. So I'm interested in your thoughts about what you are learning here that you think is in fact relevant to other places that will be going through these same challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
Okay. So I think what we're learning here is just how vital it is to think differently and try different approaches. That is so critical. We will not get to where we need to be doing the same things that we've been doing that has gotten us to the place where we are at today. It will not work. Higher education needs to think differently about how it delivers and what the purpose of that delivery is for and to who. I think that's the biggest thing that I'm learning is that there is a huge cultural shift that needs to take place. We can get the curriculum right, we can get the structure right, we can get the support right, we can get all of those things right, but it won't happen unless we accept that, and we accept that we need to do it differently and take different approaches to it.
Mr. Mayor, final words on that.
Yeah, I would, look, I mean, all mayors, and I would say all mayors, big city mayors, are evaluated on a K through 12 model. And that's just wrong. You've got to be, whether you like it or not, we're a pre-K to college model. You got to go earlier, and you got to go and make sure people are ready to go longer. I see a colleague from Orland Park. I spoke at the Metro Mayor's Conference, and I invited them all to come here because there's not a single mayor, small, medium, or large city, that when they're talking to future employers, people moving companies, people moving or expanding an operation, does not talk about the reliability of a workforce that they know they can always count on. And the only way they can do that is what are the educational institutions in that area doing to support a workforce? One closing comment. Aerotron is now building the largest intermodal facility at a gateway airport in the United States. It's here at O'Hare. So it's not an airport just dedicated to that. But so, I mean, we handle in Chicago 1/3 of China's air cargo into the United States. And Aerotron, when they looked around, a lot of airports competing, some other states. The fact that Olive Harvey had, which is our school on transportation, distribution, and logistics, is on the southeast side of the city of Chicago. O'Hare's on the very far northwest side. But that we had a regular system to train people with truck driving degrees, understanding on-time delivery logistics, wasn't what tipped the scales, but pushed the scales. And that is what is, in my view, you cannot, and as a mayor today, say, here's my high school graduation. You have to say, here's my high school graduation number, here's my going to college number or post-high school educational number. And if you just ask that simple question, you will get people to start realizing that they are accountable for not K through 12, but pre-K through college. And that measurement will start to force all of us to reevaluate what we're responsible and accountable for. And we're doing it, and I'll say this, I don't know if we're going to be successful, but we're going to get caught trying.
All right. Join me in thanking Chancellor Hyman, Mayor Emanuel, Dr. Goodman, Melody Barnes.